What happens when one of the most talked about figures in the world sits down for what should be a simple interview and it turns into an absolute disaster? In just 36 seconds of one particular exchange, everything falls apart. A guest who walked in expecting praise walks out in fury, and what unfolds in between is nothing short of television chaos. Greg Gutfeld sat behind his desk that evening, ready for another show. His guest was someone who had been making headlines for years. Meghan Markle, the former actress turned royal turned media personality, had agreed to come on the show to talk about her latest projects. It seemed like it would be interesting television. Nobody knew just how interesting it would become. The interview started normally enough. Greg welcomed her to the show with his usual energy. The audience clapped. Meghan smiled and waved. She settled into her chair across from Greg, looking polished and prepared. The cameras rolled. "Thanks for having me," Meghan said, crossing her legs and adjusting her jacket. "Of course. Thanks for being here," Greg replied. "So, let's jump right in. You've been in the public eye for a long time now. How are you handling everything?" Meghan leaned forward slightly. "Well, Greg, I think the real question is, why am I still having to handle anything at all? I've been very open about my experiences. I've shared my truth, and yet people still question me." Greg nodded, keeping his expression neutral. "Sure, but isn't that part of being a public figure? People are going to have opinions. They're going to ask questions. There's a difference between having opinions and launching coordinated attacks," Meghan said, her tone becoming more serious. "What I've experienced goes far beyond normal scrutiny." "Opinions are one thing," Meghan said, her voice getting a bit sharper. "But what I've dealt with goes beyond opinions. It's been attacks. It's been lies. It's been a coordinated effort to destroy my reputation." "Okay," Greg said, sitting back in his chair. "But you've also made some pretty serious accusations yourself. You've talked about racism. You've talked about being silenced. Those are heavy claims. Don't you think people deserve to ask questions about those things?" Meghan's smile faded. "Are you questioning whether I experienced racism?" "I'm saying that when someone makes claims like that, especially about institutions or individuals, it's fair for people to want details." "It's fair for people to examine the evidence," Greg responded calmly. "So you do need evidence," Meghan said, her voice hardening. "You need me to prove that I experienced what I experienced." "I'm saying that when you make public accusations, people are going to want to understand what happened," Greg clarified. "That's not unreasonable." "It is unreasonable when you're asking someone to prove their trauma," Meghan countered. "When you're asking someone to prove they were hurt. That's not fair." "But you went on international television," Greg said gently. "You made these claims in front of billions of people. You had to know there would be questions." Meghan crossed her arms. "I knew there would be questions from people who didn't want to believe me, from people who were invested in protecting certain institutions. I guess I just didn't expect it from you." "Why not from me?" Greg asked, genuinely curious. "What made you think I wouldn't ask questions?" The studio got quieter. You could feel the tension building. Meghan shifted in her seat. "The evidence is my lived experience," she said firmly. "I don't need to prove my pain to anyone." "I'm not asking you to prove your pain," Greg said. "But you went on international television and made allegations that affected real people, real institutions. That has consequences. People want to understand what actually happened." Meghan's face hardened. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is the problem. Instead of believing women, instead of listening to people of color, you immediately go into interrogation mode. You demand evidence. You question our truth." Greg raised his hand slightly. "You are trying to keep things calm." "I'm not questioning your truth. I'm doing what journalists do. I'm asking questions. That's literally my job." "Your job?" Meghan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your job is to give me a platform to speak, not to grill me like I'm on trial." Actually, Greg said, leaning forward, my job is to have conversations. Real conversations. Not just to sit here and let someone say whatever they want without any pushback. That's not an interview. That's a lecture. I'm not refusing to answer anything, Meghan protested. I'm refusing to be interrogated. I've asked you maybe 3 questions, Greg said. That's interrogation? It's the way you're asking them, Meghan said. The tone, the implication. I'm asking you to explain things you've said publicly, Greg said. How's that wrong? The audience was completely silent now. Meghan stared at Greg, her jaw tight. I came here thinking we could have an honest discussion, she said coldly. So did I, Greg replied. And honest discussions include questions, even hard ones. Meghan stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. You know what? I don't have to sit here and be disrespected. Greg looked genuinely confused. How have I disrespected you? By asking you questions. By treating me like I'm some kind of liar, Meghan shot back, her voice rising. By acting like my experiences don't matter. I never said your experiences don't matter, Greg said, staying seated, keeping his voice level. I just asked you to talk about them in more detail. That's not disrespect. That's conversation. No, Meghan said, pointing at him. This is what you do. This is what people like you do. You pretend to want a dialogue, but really, you just want to tear people down. You want to make me look bad. Greg shook his head. I don't want to make you look bad. I invited you here to talk. You're the one getting upset because I'm not just agreeing with everything you say. I'm upset because you're being condescending, Meghan said loudly. You're sitting there with that smug look on your face, acting like you know better than me about my own life. I'm not acting like I know better, Greg said, his voice still calm but firmer now. I'm asking you to explain your perspective. That's it. If you can't handle basic questions, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. That was the moment everything exploded. Meghan's eyes went wide. Excuse me? Maybe I shouldn't be doing interviews? Who do you think you are? I'm someone trying to do my job, Greg said, and you're making it really difficult. I'm making it difficult? Meghan's voice was shaking now with anger. You invited me here. You asked me to come on your show. And now you're attacking me. I'm not attacking you, Greg said, standing up now too. But I'm also not going to sit here and be told I can't ask questions. This is my show. These are my rules. And if you don't like that, you're free to leave. Meghan stared at him for a long moment. The whole studio was frozen. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. You know what your problem is, Greg, Meghan finally said, her voice low and cold. You can't stand that I won't play your game. You can't stand that I'm not some weak little person you can push around. You need to control the narrative, and when someone like me comes along and refuses to let you do that, you panic. Greg actually laughed at that. Not a mean laugh, but an amazed one. Are you serious right now? You're upset because I asked you to back up your claims. That's not controlling the narrative. That's basic journalism. It's not journalism when you have an agenda, Meghan said sharply. What agenda? Greg asked. Please, tell me what my agenda is. To make me look bad, Meghan said without hesitation. To discredit me. Greg shook his head slowly. I invited you here because I thought we could have a real conversation, but you're not interested in conversation. It's not journalism, Meghan snapped. It's a hit job, and I see right through it. A hit job, Greg repeated slowly. And I asked you maybe 3 or 4 questions, and you're calling it a hit job. Do you hear yourself? I hear myself perfectly, Meghan said, and I also hear you. I hear the bias. I hear the skepticism. I hear everything you're not saying, but thinking. Greg spread his hands out. You can't read my mind, Meghan. You're getting angry at things I haven't even said. I don't need to read your mind, she replied. Your attitude says it all. The way you're looking at me. The way you're talking to me. Like I'm some kind of problem that needs to be solved. The only problem here is that you came on my show expecting me to just nod along with whatever you said, Greg told her. That's not how this works. That's never how this has worked. Meghan grabbed her purse from beside her chair. I've done hundreds of interviews, Greg. Real interviews with real journalists. And not one of them has treated me the way you're treating me right now. Maybe that's because they were too afraid to ask you real questions, Greg said. Maybe they just wanted the exclusive and didn't care about the truth. Or maybe they treated me with basic human decency, Meghan shot back. I haven't been cruel, Greg said firmly. I've been direct. There's a difference. The truth? Meghan's voice was getting louder again. You want to talk about truth? The truth is, you're a bully. The truth is, you invited me here just to embarrass me. The truth is, this whole thing was a setup from the beginning. Greg shook his head, looking tired now. It wasn't a setup. You're being paranoid. What I asked you normal questions that any interviewer would ask. Normal questions, Meghan repeated mockingly. Right, because it's totally normal to question whether someone experienced racism. It's totally normal to demand proof of someone's trauma. I didn't demand proof of your trauma, Greg said, his patience clearly wearing thin. I asked you to explain what happened. There's a difference. There's no difference to me, Meghan said. When you question my experience, you're questioning me. You're calling me a liar. I never called you a liar, Greg said firmly. Not once. You're putting words in my mouth. I don't need to put words in your mouth, Meghan said. Your whole tone, your whole demeanor, it all says what you really think. Greg took a breath, clearly trying to stay calm. Okay, you know what? Let's reset. Let's start over. Sit back down, and we can have a real conversation. No, Meghan said immediately. I'm done. I'm not sitting here for one more second while you disrespect me. How am I disrespecting you? Greg asked, his voice rising slightly in frustration. By not worshiping you? By treating you like everyone else? By treating me like I'm beneath you, Meghan shot back. By acting like my voice doesn't matter. Your voice matters, Greg said. That's why I invited you here. But you also have to be willing to have an actual dialogue. You can't just come on and expect everyone to agree with you. I don't expect everyone to agree with me, Meghan said. But I do expect basic respect. And you clearly can't give me that. Greg laughed again, but this time it was sharper. This is unbelievable. I've been nothing but respectful. You're the one who started getting hostile the second I asked a follow-up question. I got hostile? Meghan looked genuinely shocked. You've been hostile since I sat down. That's completely untrue, Greg said. Go back and watch the tape. I welcomed you. I asked you polite questions, and you immediately got defensive. Because I know where this was going, Meghan said. I've seen your show before. I know how you operate. You bring people on just to make them look stupid. If I wanted to make you look stupid, I wouldn't have to do anything, Greg said. You're doing that all by yourself. The audience gasped. That was the line that changed everything. Meghan's face went red. What did you just say to me? Greg didn't back down. You heard me. You came on my show, got upset over nothing, accused me of things I didn't do, and now you're throwing a tantrum because I won't treat you like royalty. You're making yourself look bad, not me. How dare you, Meghan said, her voice shaking. How dare you speak to me that way? I'll speak to you the same way I'd speak to anyone else, Greg said. You're not special. You're not above criticism. And you're certainly not above being asked questions. I never said I was above anything, Meghan said, her eyes filling with tears now. Real or fake, it was hard to tell. But I deserve to be treated with dignity. You have been treated with dignity, Greg insisted. You just don't like that I'm not kissing your feet. Meghan wiped at her eyes. This is abuse. This is straight up abuse. Oh, come on, Greg said, throwing his hands up. Abuse? Really? Because I asked you about your claims? That's abuse now? Emotional abuse, yes, Meghan said. You're gaslighting me. You're making me feel crazy for having feelings. You are acting crazy, Greg said bluntly. You're acting like I committed some crime by doing my job. Your job is not to attack your guests, Meghan said. And my job is also not to be a doormat, Greg replied. I asked you fair questions. You refused to answer them. You got upset. You accused me of things that aren't true, and now you're trying to make yourself the victim. Again. Again? Meghan's voice went cold. What's that supposed to mean? It means you have a pattern, Greg said, crossing his arms. Whenever someone challenges you, whenever someone doesn't immediately take your side, you claim you're being attacked. You claim you're being victimized. It's what you do. That's not what I do, Meghan said, her voice shaking with anger. That's what people like you say to dismiss legitimate complaints. Legitimate complaints require legitimate evidence, Greg said. You haven't provided any. I shouldn't have to provide evidence of my own life, Meghan said. I was there. I lived it. That should be enough. For your personal diary, sure, Greg said. But when you make public accusations, when you damage people's reputations, when you make claims that affect institutions and individuals, it's not enough to just say, trust me. That's not how the world works. It should be how the world works, Meghan insisted. People should believe victims. You're not a victim here, Greg said calmly. You're someone who made claims and is now upset that people want more information. That's not victimhood. That's accountability. You don't know me, Meghan said quietly, dangerously. I know what I see, Greg said. I know what everyone sees. Someone who can't take criticism. Someone who plays the victim card every single time things don't go their way. Meghan picked up her microphone pack and started unhooking it from her clothes. I'm leaving. Good, Greg said, because this interview is over anyway. You can't kick me off, Meghan said, fumbling with the wires. I'm leaving on my own terms. Call it whatever you want, Greg said. The result is the same. Whatever helps you sleep at night, Greg said, sitting back down at his desk. Meghan finally got the microphone off and threw it onto her chair. You're going to regret this. I doubt it, Greg said calmly. People are going to hear about how you treated me, Meghan said, pointing at him again. Everyone is going to know what kind of person you really are. They already know what kind of person I am, Greg said. I'm the person who asks questions, the person who doesn't play games. And if that bothers you, that's your problem, not mine. Meghan stared at him one more time, her chest heaving. Then she turned to the audience. You all saw this, right? You saw how he treated me? The audience was silent. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Nobody spoke up. Meghan looked around desperately. Someone say something. Still silence. One person in the back coughed. This is unbelievable, Meghan said, her voice breaking. You're all just going to sit there? Meghan looked betrayed. Of course. Of course you're all on his side. They're not on anyone's side, Greg said from his desk. They just watched an interview. They're not on anyone's side, Greg said from his desk. They just watched an interview where I asked you questions and you melted down. That's what they saw. That's not what happened, Meghan insisted, but her voice was weaker now. That's exactly what happened, Greg said, and the cameras got all of it. Meghan looked around the studio one last time, her eyes wild, looking for someone to support her. Nobody moved. This is disgusting, she finally said. All of you should be ashamed. And with that, she turned and walked off the set. Her heels clicked against the floor, loud in the silence. Someone on the crew moved to follow her, but Greg waved them off. Let her go, he said quietly. The studio stayed frozen for a few more seconds. Then Greg turned to the camera. Well, he said, a small smile on his face. That was something. The audience finally reacted, some laughing nervously, some clapping. "We're going to take a quick break," Greg said. "When we come back, we'll talk about what just happened. Stay with us." The cameras cut and the stage lights dimmed slightly. Greg sat at his desk, shaking his head. Some of the crew members came over to check on him. "You okay?" one of them asked. "Yeah," Greg said, loosening his tie a bit. "That was wild, though." "She really just left," another crew member said, looking toward the exit where Meghan had disappeared. "Yep," Greg said. "Couldn't handle a few questions." In the hallway outside the studio, Meghan was surrounded by her team. They were trying to calm her down, but she was still furious. "Did you see that?" she kept saying. "Did you see how he talked to me?" Her publicist was on the phone already, doing damage control. Her assistant was getting her coat. Everyone was moving quickly, trying to get her out of the building. Back in the studio, Greg was going over notes with his producers. They were talking about how to handle the rest of the show, what to say when they came back from break. "Just be honest," one producer suggested. "Tell people what they just saw." "That's the plan," Greg agreed. When the show came back on air, Greg addressed the camera directly. "Okay, so that just happened," he said. "Our guest, Meghan Markle, walked off the show, and I want to be very clear about why." He paused, making sure he had everyone's attention. "I asked her questions," he continued. "Normal, fair questions about things she said publicly, and instead of answering those questions, she got upset. She accused me of attacking her. She accused me of disrespecting her, and then she left." Greg leaned forward. "Now, I want you all to think about that for a second," he said. "I didn't yell. I didn't insult her. I didn't do anything except ask her to explain her positions, and that was apparently too much." He sat back again. "This is the problem we're dealing with in our culture right now," Greg said. "Some people think that being asked questions is the same as being attacked. They think that disagreement is the same as disrespect. And when you challenge that mindset, even politely, they fall apart." The audience was listening intently now. "I don't regret anything I said tonight," Greg continued. "I treated our guest exactly how I would treat anyone else. I asked her to back up her claims. I asked her to explain her thinking, and she couldn't handle it." Greg shrugged. "So she left," he said simply. "And that tells you everything you need to know." He looked directly into the camera. "If you can't answer basic questions about your own statements, maybe you shouldn't be making those statements in the first place," Greg said. "And if you think being challenged is the same as being attacked, you're not ready for public life." The audience applauded. Greg nodded at them. "All right," he said. "Let's move on to our next segment." And just like that, the show continued. Greg moved to the next topic, the next guest, the next conversation. Professional, unbothered. Exactly what you'd expect from someone who had nothing to apologize for. The interview, all 12 minutes of it, would be talked about for days. People would watch the footage over and over. They would debate who was right and who was wrong. They would analyze every word, every gesture, every facial expression. But in the studio that night, after the show ended and the lights went down and everyone went home, the story was simple. A host did his job. A guest couldn't handle it, and the whole world watched it fall apart. Greg packed up his things and headed out. Another show done. Another night of television in the books. He didn't seem stressed or worried. He seemed fine, because at the end of the day, he knew he'd done nothing wrong. He'd asked questions. That was it. That was all. And if someone couldn't handle that, well, that was their problem to deal with. The cameras had captured everything. The questions, the reactions, the escalation, the exit. 12 minutes that showed exactly what happens when someone expects special treatment and doesn't get it. 12 minutes that revealed more than hours of careful interviews ever could. 12 minutes of pure, unscripted reality. And Greg Gutfeld had simply sat there, done his job, and let it all unfold exactly as it was always going to unfold. Because the truth has a way of coming out, whether people want it to or not.